The wind screamed down from the ridges that night, sharp enough to flay bark from pine and skin from bone. Fog rolled low over the holler, swallowing the narrow path that wound toward Dry Hollow. Elias Ridgewalker's horse stumbled once, twice before catching its footing on slick rock. The man tightened his grip on the small bundle in his arms, a fever-hot infant whose faint whimpers barely rose above the wind. "Hold on, little one," Elias murmured. His voice was gravel-worn from years of mountain silence. "You ain't got no mother left, but you got me tonight." The child shivered against him, lips, cracked skin, gray. Elias knew the baby wouldn't last till morning without milk. He'd tried goat's milk, herbs, even river water sweetened with pine sap. But the boy had turned his head away each time. Elias had seen death before his wife's body still lay in his memory, half buried in snow on the high ridge. But there was something in this child's eyes, something that refused to fade. He followed the last glimmer of lantern light through the fog. The path widened near a sagging cabin, smoke curling from its chimney like a weak heartbeat. He stopped, hesitating. He'd heard stories of the widow who lived alone at the edge of town, Mara Whitcomb, they called her. A good woman once, till grief made her strange. Some said she'd lost her mind after her baby died. Others said she still heard his cries in the wind. Elias dismounted. The baby whimpered again, a sound so thin and broken it cut through the fog like a cry from another world. He knocked. The door opened a crack. A face appeared in the lantern glow, pale, freckled, framed by hair the color of rusted wheat. Her eyes were hollow, the kind that had seen too much and refused to blink. "What do you want at this hour?" she asked, her voice raw from disuse. Elias lowered his head slightly. "I need help with what?" He loosened the blanket, revealing the baby's face. "He's dying." Mara's hand flew to her chest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The child's small mouth opened soundlessly, his eyes unfocused. The sight hit her like a musket shot, the weight of memory, the ghost of her own boy, Samuel, gone just 3 months. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't do this again." "You can," Elias said. "You're the only one who can." Their eyes locked, hers clouded with fear, his with quiet desperation. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters like impatient hands. "Please," he said. "He don't belong to me, but he ain't got nobody else." The words hung there, trembling between them. Finally, Mara opened the door wider. "Bring him in." The cabin was small, neat, and heavy with the smell of wood smoke and rosemary. A Bible sat open on the table beside a tiny carved rattle. Mara took the baby gently from Elias. The warmth of him, feverish, fragile, seeped into her palms. She felt her body remember before her mind caught up. Without a word, she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled him close. The child latched on instinctively. Elias turned away, respectful, his jaw tight. He listened to the sound of soft sucking, the rhythm of life returning to a body that had nearly crossed over. When it was done, Mara laid the baby down beside the fire. "He'll need more than one feeding," she said quietly. "I can come back," Elias offered. She nodded, not looking at him. "What's his name? Don't know," Elias said. "His ma called him something once, but I never learned it. Thought maybe you'd give him one." Mara hesitated. "Names matter. Then choose one that means he'll live." She studied the boy's tiny fingers, the way they curled around nothing. "Joey," she said finally. "He looks like a Joey." Elias nodded. "Then Joey it is." He stood adjusting his hat. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she replied. "You don't know what this will cost." Elias paused at the door. Sometimes the cost don't matter when you're paying for a life. Their eyes met again, two broken souls bound by the same quiet sorrow. Then he stepped into the fog, vanishing into the night. Mara sat by the fire long after he'd gone. The flames danced against the walls, casting long shadows that looked too much like ghosts. Joey stirred in his sleep, his breath raspy but steady. She brushed a hand over his forehead. "You're warm," she whispered. "That's good. Warm means living." From the window she could see the outline of Dry Hollow below the town, sleeping under its shroud of fog and judgment. She could already feel their eyes, the whispers that would come if anyone learned she'd taken in a stranger's child, worse a child of mixed blood. Her late husband's family had barely tolerated her after Samuel's death. They'd call her cursed for sure now. But Joey's small chest rose and fell, and that was all that mattered. For the first time since Samuel's burial, the cabin didn't feel entirely empty. She stared at the tiny rattle on the table. It had belonged to her son. Without thinking, she placed it beside Joey. "Maybe you'll like it better than he did," she murmured. The wind rattled the shutters again, and she swore she heard a whisper in the noise, something that sounded like a baby's laugh, carried from far away. Elias rode back toward the mountains. He didn't look back until he reached the tree line. His cabin was gone, burned down weeks ago, by men who'd seen him as a threat, a reminder of what they'd tried to erase. He lived off the land now, carrying only what fit in his saddlebag, his wife's necklace, a flask of whiskey, and a promise he hadn't learned to break, protect what's left. He dismounted near a stream and let his horse drink. He crouched down, touching the cold water. He thought about the woman in the cabin, the way her eyes had trembled not from fear, but from remembering. Maybe she'd found something in the baby he couldn't give. The fog was thickening again. Elias lifted his gaze toward the faint light from Mara's cabin far below. "Hold on, little one," he whispered. "You've got more fight in you than you know." Then he turned back into the darkness. By dawn, Mara hadn't slept. She sat in the rocking chair watching Joey's chest rise and fall. Each breath felt like a fragile victory. Cassie June stirred in the loft above, rubbing her eyes as she peered down. "Miss Mara," she yawned. "Who's the baby?" Mara hesitated. "Just someone who needed a bit of help." Cassie climbed down, curiosity bright in her gaze. "He's awful small." "He's strong," Mara corrected softly. "He'll live." Cassie tilted her head. "Town won't like it much you taking in a strange baby." Mara's eyes stayed on the child. "Town don't run my house." The girl frowned. "Still, folks talk." Mara finally looked up, and in her gaze burned something fierce and unyielding. "Let 'em talk. The day I let their words decide who lives and dies in my care is the day I stop being worth anything at all." Cassie nodded slowly, though she didn't fully understand. She looked out the window at the rolling fog. Somewhere in it, a lone figure was making his way back into the hills. That night, Mara stood by the door, the baby cradled in her arms. The fog was thick again, wrapping the world in silence. She whispered into the dark, "Come back tomorrow, if he makes it through the night." Far above in the woods, Elias heard her voice carried faint on the wind, and for the first time in a long while he believed maybe Mercy hadn't died in these mountains after all. Cassie. June stood by the stove barefoot on the cold floorboards, watching Mara cradle the infant against her chest in the soft, milky glow of dawn. The smell of wet earth and wood smoke crept in through the cracked window, mixing with the faint sourness of sweat and sickness clinging to the baby's skin. Joey had made it through the night, but just barely. His breath was light, his body limp, his eyelids fluttering like a moth caught in still air. Mara hadn't moved from the rocking chair in hours. Her eyes were red but dry, too tired for tears. Her nightgown clung damply to her back, and the front of it was stained with milk. Still, she held him like he was glass and gold all at once. Cassie poured hot water into the basin and brought a cloth over. "Want me to take him for a bit so you can eat?" Mara shook her head slowly. "No, he needs to stay warm." "You ain't touched your plate," Cassie pointed out. Mara finally looked at her. Her voice cracked. "Every drop of milk carries a memory I can't forget." Cassie didn't fully understand what she meant, but she didn't press. She just nodded and set the cloth down nearby. Elias arrived near mid-morning, his boots caked in red clay hat in hand. He looked more worn than yesterday, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders tight with unease. The moment his eyes landed on Joey, he paused, watching the small chest rise and fall against Mara's body. "He made it?" Elias asked. Mara didn't look up. "Barely." "Fever's holding steady." Elias nodded. "I brought dried black elder. Might help if you boil it down." Cassie took the bundle of herbs and went to the kitchen without a word. The two adults sat in heavy silence, only the creak of the rocking chair filling the room. "I didn't sleep," Mara said finally. "I figured. I kept thinking, what if he hadn't latched on? What if it had been too late?" Elias watched the fire. "Then we'd bury another innocent in cold earth." Mara flinched. "Don't say that." "It's the truth," he replied. "This world don't leave much room for second chances." She looked at him, really looked this time. There was no judgment in his tone, just weariness, as though he'd carried too many truths too long. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small string of beads, worn and faded. "This was his mother's," Elias said. "She tied it to his wrist when she handed him to me." Mara reached out and took it. The beads were carved from bone and wood, faintly warm from his pocket. She threaded it around Joey's wrist gently, like an act of naming. "Where was she from?" she asked. "Over the ridge, near Tellico Creek. Cherokee like my mother was." Mara tensed. "That'll make things harder." "I know." They fell quiet again. Joey stirred his tiny hand, brushing Mara's collarbone. She didn't move. "You gonna keep bringing him?" she asked. "If you'll let me," Elias said. She nodded. "For now." That afternoon, Mara stepped outside for the first time in days, the baby bundled against her. The late autumn sun slanted through the trees, casting long, golden stripes across the dirt. Cassie stayed inside, tidying and boiling the elder. Elias helped Mara down the porch steps. "You sure you're up to it? I need air. And he needs sun." She looked down at Joey. He's still pale as cream. They walked slowly toward the edge of the clearing, where the trees grew thick and the creek whispered behind them. Elias carried his rifle, but not for game, just habit. "How long have you lived up there in the hills?" she asked. "Since before the war." "My father built the cabin. My wife and I stayed there after her people were pushed west." Mara winced. "I'm sorry. She died 3 winters ago. Same sickness that took half her clan. I buried her in a hollow cedar." Mara touched the beads on Joey's wrist. "And now you're all he's got." "Not anymore," Elias said, looking at her. "He's got you too." They reached the creek and sat on a flat stone. Joey squirmed lightly, then drifted off to sleep against Mara's chest. "I thought I was done feeling things," Mara said after a while. "After Samuel died, the world stopped. The days passed, but I didn't move with them. And now," she looked down at the baby, "now I feel everything." Back at the cabin, Cassie watched through the window as they returned. She noticed how Elias's hand hovered near Mara's back, not touching, but present. She saw how Mara's body leaned slightly toward him without realizing. And in Joey's small, curled frame she saw a bridge neither of them were ready to name. That evening, as Elias stood to leave, he hesitated by the door. Some of the women in town saw me riding this way. Mara stiffened. Let them look. They'll talk. About you. About the child. They already do. You'll need to be ready. Mara nodded, her voice steady. I've buried shame. I ain't afraid of gossip. He looked at her a long moment. You're stronger than they'll ever understand. I don't need them to understand, she said. Just need Joey to live. Elias opened the door, the fog already creeping low again. I'll come back tomorrow. Mara looked down at Joey. He'll be waiting. After he left, Cassie spoke from the corner where she'd been sewing. Ain't no way the town's gonna let this be. Mara didn't respond. She just sat by the fire and rocked, watching the baby's face. They see you with that man again, Cassie said. They'll do more than whisper. Mara's voice came quiet but certain. Let 'em. Cassie swallowed hard. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew trouble was already turning toward them like a storm down the mountain. And in the heart of Dry Hollow, behind lace curtains and drawn blinds, Bo Garrison swirled his drink in silence, listening to the rumors bleeding through town like smoke. Tomorrow he would send someone to check, just to be sure. Because if the whispers were true, if Mara Whitcomb was feeding a Cherokee's child, then she wasn't just breaking social code. She was crossing a line Dry Hollow would never forgive. Bo Garrison leaned on the balcony rail of his second-story office, chewing a sliver of tobacco, watching Dry Hollow unfold beneath him like a rotting peach. His fingers tapped the wood slowly, methodically. The streets were quiet that morning. Church bells still hours from ringing the general store, not yet unlatched. But Bo didn't need noise to feel something was shifting. It was in the air, thick like syrup, tense like a misfired pistol. Below, two of his men stood waiting, Ebb Petty and Lucas Vaughn. Ebb was broad and dumb as an ox. Lucas wasn't much smarter, but he asked fewer questions. Ride to the edge of town, Bo said. See if that ridgewalker's been skulking around again. Lucas adjusted his hat. You want us to speak to the widow? Spat into a spittoon near his boot. I want eyes. That's it. Don't stir the pot till I say. Ebb cracked his knuckles. What if she's got the brat Bo's eyes narrowed? Then we'll see what needs doing. But for now, watch. Listen. The two men nodded and left. Bo turned back into his office where a framed photograph of his late wife stared blankly from the mantel. He poured himself a drink before noon and whispered to the air, what starts in the shadows always finds its way to the light. At the cabin, Mara had already seen the dust trails rising from the north trail. They're coming, she said, without looking up from Joey's sleeping body. Cassie peered through the window and tensed. It's them boys from the saloon. Garrison's men. Elias, who had arrived just after dawn with another satchel of herbs and dried fruit, moved his hand to his belt knife. Mara shook her head. Not yet. We ain't hiding anything. Let them knock. The knock came loud and arrogant. Elias stepped back into the kitchen while Mara opened the door with Joey tucked in one arm. Ebb and Lucas tried not to look at the baby directly. Mornin', Miss Whitcomb, Lucas said, too smooth. Mornin', she returned, cool as a creek bed. Just checking on folks, Ebb said, failing at casual. Heard tell of some visitors up this way. You can tell whoever's asking that folks are fine, she said, and visitors don't need tending. Lucas leaned slightly. That baby yours, no, Mara said. But he's under my care. Ebb scratched at his stubbled jaw. He don't look local. Mara narrowed her eyes. Neither do you. Lucas gave a tight smile. Town's talkin'. Reverend says there's concern. Then the Reverend can come himself, she snapped, and shut the door in their faces. Inside, Elias let out a breath. You know that's just gonna stoke the fire. I ain't bowing for men like that, she replied. Joey whimpered in her arms, sensing the tension. Mara's tone softened. He don't deserve to grow up in fear. Elias looked at her like he was seeing someone for the first time. Neither did you. At the church that Sunday, Reverend Briggs stood at the pulpit, hands trembling more than usual. The air in the sanctuary was charged. He knew what was coming before he stepped up. The whispers had reached him before the sermon bell rang. He looked out at the pews, Garrison in the back, arms crossed. Mrs. Voss clutching her purse tight, as if faith might leak out. Caleb Haynes, the blacksmith, with a look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. Briggs cleared his throat. This morning I had planned to speak on forgiveness, but I reckon we need to talk about fear. A murmur rippled through the room. There's talk going around about a woman doing what she can for a child that ain't hers, about a man who's different and a baby that don't look like us. Bo Garrison raised an eyebrow. Briggs continued. Let me say this plain, the Lord didn't say love your neighbor only if they match your skin or your last name or your history. He said love 'em. That's it. Mrs. Voss stood abruptly. Are you saying what she's doing is right? I'm saying what she's doing is human, Briggs replied. And we'd do well to remember we answer to more than just each other. Bo stood then. Preacher, are you defending a woman who's harboring a half-breed under her roof? The room went still. Briggs straightened. I'm saying I've seen the child. And I've seen Mara Whitcomb feed him from her own body, knowing full well what folks like you would say. That ain't sin. That's sacrifice. Bo walked out without another word, and several followed. That night Mara sat in the rocker while Elias sharpened his blade quietly. You think it'll come to violence? She asked. Elias didn't answer right away. Violence don't always come with fists. Sometimes it's slower. Words, isolation, cuts you deep all the same. Cassie brought in firewood and paused by the door. Miss Mara, if they come for him, what'll you do? Mara looked down at Joey asleep in her arms again. I'll fight. Cassie nodded. Me too. Elias stood. I've seen whole families torn apart over less. We need help. From who? Mara asked. There's a man up past the ridge, Elias said. Name's Knowledge. He's a council elder, Cherokee blood like mine. His word holds weight. You think he'd come down here? Cassie asked. If I ask, Elias said he might. Mara didn't answer, but her silence wasn't resistance, it was consideration. Elias added softly, You don't have to do this alone. She finally met his eyes. Then go. Bring someone who remembers what justice smells like. He nodded once and turned toward the door. 2 days later, the town's mood had soured further. Caleb Haynes caught Cassie at the well and whispered Garrison's raising a petition to have her removed. Claims she's unfit. Cassie clenched her jaw. Unfit to who she's saving a baby. That don't matter to men like Bo, Caleb muttered. He wants her gone. Back at the cabin, Mara felt the tide turning. She watched the horizon and waited. That night, Joey had a coughing fit that lasted till morning. Mara didn't sleep again. Her arms ached from holding him. Her soul ached from everything else. Cassie brought her tea and sat on the floor. Maybe if folks knew more, they wouldn't judge so hard. Maybe Mara said. But most folks don't want truth. They want stories that fit their fears. Cassie looked out the window. Think Elias will make it back in time. Mara didn't answer. She just pulled Joey tighter and said softly, he has to. Because come morning, Garrison would make his next move, and Dry Hollow would have to choose which shadow to stand in. The smoke reached Elias before the fire did. He smelled it on the wind, sharp, acrid, too fresh to be from hearthwood. It was the kind of smoke born from spite from men who burned not to warm themselves, but to make sure something couldn't stand again. He came over the last ridge and saw the sky bleeding orange behind the trees. His cabin, what was left of it, crackled and hissed as flames chewed through the last support beams. The structure groaned like it knew it was dying. Elias didn't run. He just stood there, jaw locked, fists clenched at his sides. A crow shrieked overhead. Below the fire danced like a funeral pyre. Someone had waited for him to leave. Someone had followed him. And someone wanted a message sent. He stepped forward until the heat kissed his skin and threw his arm in front of his face. On the far side, buried beneath what used to be floorboards, he saw the edge of a box, blackened but not consumed. He stomped through smoking ash to grab it with a scrap of cloth. The lid was scorched. The leather straps were gone. But inside, wrapped in deerskin and still dry, were 4 things: his wife's beaded necklace, a charcoal sketch of her face, a child's buckskin slipper, and a single eagle feather tied with red thread. He held the feather for a long time before tucking it into his shirt. Some folks carry torches to light the way. He muttered, voice low and hollow, others carry 'em to burn bridges. Then he turned and started back toward Dry Hollow smoke, trailing behind him like a curse. Mara was at the creek when she saw him coming. The sun was high and hot, and Joey lay swaddled in a basket beside her, finally asleep. She stood as Elias approached, noticing the soot on his skin and the tightness in his walk. What happened? She asked. They burned it, he said. Waited till I left. Her eyes darted to the trees behind him. Your cabin, he nodded. Nothing left but ghosts and this. He handed her the scorched box. Mara knelt, unwrapping the contents. Her fingers lingered on the beaded necklace on the sketch. Her breath caught when she saw the slipper. You had a child, we tried. She was born too soon. Didn't last past winter. I'm sorry, she said. Elias crouched beside her, elbows resting on his knees. You don't need to be. We bury what we love out here, then carry it in pieces. Mara looked at him, her own sorrow mirrored in his. So now they're not just coming for Joey. They're coming for you. And for you, he said. Anyone who stands close. The breeze moved through the trees like breath. Neither of them spoke for a long while. I'm not leaving, Mara said finally. I wasn't asking you to. Joey stirred in the basket, his tiny fists clenching. Mara reached down, smoothing a hand over his head. He's still got a fever. Elias nodded. Knowledge said he'd come. He's a day or 2 behind. I left word. Good. We'll need him. Elias glanced at her. You're different than I thought. How so? I thought grief had hollowed you out, he said. Turns out it just made room for fire. Back in town, Bo Garrison sat behind his desk, polishing the barrel of his shotgun. Lucas leaned in the doorway. She didn't back down, Lucas said. She didn't even flinch. Bo grunted. and Ridgewalker burned his place down, figured it might rattle him. Bo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Some men get rattled. Others get sharpened. He stood setting the shotgun aside. She's making a martyr out of herself. Fine. Martyrs burn just like the rest. Lucas hesitated. People are watching, though. That preacher's starting to talk funny. Bo's lip curled. He talks, we remind him whose church it is. Lucas swallowed hard. What if they stand with her? Bo looked at him cold. Then we'll remind them too. That night the cabin was quiet but tense. Mara sat by the hearth holding the burned box in her lap. Joey lay wrapped tight beside her. Elias carved silently at the table, shaping a new rattle from pine. Cassie watched them both from the shadows. You two act like war's already started, she said. Elias didn't look up. War don't always wait on guns. Sometimes it starts with a knock and ends with silence. Mara didn't speak. She just stared into the flames. Cassie crossed her arms. They came for his home. What's to stop 'em from coming for ours? Nothing, Elias said. Joey coughed softly in his sleep. Mara ran a hand through her hair. They want to break us apart, scare us into surrender. Cassie sat on the floor. Then what do we do? Mara looked down at Joey. We stay close. We stay ready. She turned to Elias. You said some folks carry torches to burn bridges. What do we carry? Elias met her gaze. Whatever's left when everything else is gone. The next morning brought thick clouds and tension so heavy it settled into the floorboards. Mara stood outside on the porch with Joey in her arms when she spotted Reverend Briggs riding up the trail. She didn't wait for him to dismount. You here to pray or pass judgment? She asked. Neither, Briggs said. I came to listen. He walked slowly up the steps, his boots creaking on the wood. He glanced at the baby, then at Mara. He looks stronger, the Reverend said. He is, Mara said. Folks are scared, he admitted. But not all of them are hateful. That baby don't care about bloodlines. Only arms that hold tight, she said. Why can't they see that? Briggs sighed. Fear makes folks blind. But maybe if they hear your story... No, Mara interrupted. They don't get my story. They get my choice. I chose to keep him alive. That's all that should matter. Briggs nodded slowly. You're right. But stories soften the ground before change can take root. She didn't respond. He stepped back down to his horse, then turned once more. If it comes to blows, you won't be alone. As he rode off, Elias appeared from the woods with a pouch of herbs and a grave look on his face. What is it? Mara asked. They're planning something. Lucas Vaughn's been asking about the well road. That's the back path. Mara's heart sank. When tonight, maybe tomorrow. Mara looked toward the tree line. We need to be ready. Elias reached into his coat and handed her the finished rattle. For Joey, in case he wakes up scared. She turned it in her hand, wood smooth and warm. Thank you. Elias touched her arm lightly. We stand or fall together now. And as the sun began to sink behind the ridge, casting long bruises across the earth, Mara looked out into the shadows creeping toward her cabin and said softly, Let them come. Cassie June watched from the loft window as the morning fog curled around the edge of the woods like it had secrets to tell. Down below, Mara stood barefoot on the porch, rocking Joey in her arms, while Elias chopped wood with a rhythm too steady for someone who hadn't slept. The world hadn't exploded, not yet. But the air was thick with waiting. He slept most the night, Mara said, glancing at Elias without turning her head. That fever's breakin'. Slow, but it's breakin', Elias replied, wiping his brow with his sleeve. Still too quiet, she murmured. Elias nodded. Storms always are right before. Inside, Cassie moved through the house, gathering herbs, blankets, anything they might need if the situation turned. She caught sight of her reflection in the window eyes older than her years. She pressed her fingers to the glass and whispered, "A child. Don't care about bloodlines. Only arms that hold tight." That was what she'd learned from watching Mara. From Joey. From the way Elias stood guard without being asked. It was the kind of truth she didn't know she'd needed until now. Around noon, Mara walked into Dry Hollow with Joey wrapped close to her chest. Cassie came along holding her head high. They walked the main road like they had every right to because they did. Elias didn't come. He stayed back, posted along the back trail, watching for trouble. People stopped what they were doing. Conversations died mid-sentence. A dog barked and was quickly shushed. No one moved to greet them, but no one dared step in their way either. Mara stepped into the general store. Mr. Tolan, the owner, glanced up from behind the counter. His hands paused halfway to lifting a sack of flour. "I need formula," she said plainly. "And more bandages." Tolan cleared his throat. "You nursing the baby or—" "I am," she replied. "But he's not taking enough yet. He needs both." Tolan hesitated. I don't know if I got—" Mara stepped forward, placed a silver coin on the counter. "He's a child. Not a crime." Tolan blinked, nodded, and began packing supplies in a brown paper sack. "I'll add peppermint oil. Might help his lungs." "Thank you," she said quietly. Cassie stood by the door watching the town watch them. No one said a word, but eyes spoke plenty. They spoke of fear, disgust, confusion, but also something else. Uncertainty. Back at the cabin, Elias saw the figures in the distance first. 2 riders moving slow and deliberate. One was Lucas Vaughn. The other wore a hat too clean for a farmhand, and boots polished like city brass. Deputy Elias muttered under his breath. He moved to the edge of the woods, staying just hidden enough. When the men arrived, Elias emerged from behind a tree rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. "You looking for trouble or just stretching your legs?" Lucas tipped his hat. "Just checking on Miss Whitcomb. Heard she's been walking around town." "She's got every right to," Elias said. "Same as anyone." The deputy new in town spoke up. "Folks say she's got a baby under her care. A baby that ain't hers." Elias stepped forward, calm but direct. "A baby someone else left to die. She's feeding him." "That a crime now?" Lucas looked away, jaw tight. The deputy adjusted his belt. "Ain't here to make trouble, just askin' questions." "You asked," Elias said. "Now you got your answer. She's inside. Baby's asleep. If you knock too loud and wake him, you'll answer to her, not me." There was a pause. Lucas muttered, "Come on, let's go." They turned back toward town. Elias watched them leave, then exhaled slowly. They were testing boundaries now, seeing who'd bend. That meant the real storm wasn't far behind. Later that evening, Reverend Briggs arrived unannounced. He came on foot alone, hat in hand. Mara opened the door, weary but not unkind. "You here to warn me again?" "No," Briggs said. "I'm here to stand beside you." She stepped aside, letting him in. He sat near the hearth, glancing at Joey, now sleeping in a wicker basket lined with quilts. "He's stronger. He's a fighter. Briggs nodded. I spent last night writing a sermon I thought might change hearts. But it won't. Not on its own. Mara folded her arms. Then why bother? Because it's a start, he said. And because I believe in what you're doing. So do others. They're just scared. Scared of what a baby with the wrong skin. Briggs didn't flinch. Scared of what it means if they're wrong. Scared of having to admit someone they looked down on is doing something holy. Mara looked down. They'll try to take him. I know. Will you stop them? Briggs met her eyes. I'll try. But if it comes down to law, you'll need more than a preacher. You'll need proof he belongs. Mara stepped away, opened the drawer, and pulled out the beaded bracelet Elias had saved from the fire. This is all we have, she said. Briggs nodded. It might be enough, if someone's willing to speak for him. That night, Elias returned with word Knowledge would arrive by dawn. He's bringing 2 others, Elias said. Elders. They'll testify if it comes to it. Good, Mara replied. She sat on the porch, Joey pressed against her chest. The baby was calm, drowsy, his tiny hand curled around her finger, like he'd always known it. Elias sat beside her. Cassie leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. They're coming, Cassie said. You can feel it in the dirt. I know, Mara whispered. Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees. They'll say this baby don't belong. But he does, Mara said. He belongs to life, to breath, to hope. Elias glanced sideways. You ready for what that means? She nodded. I claimed him today in town, she said. Elias blinked. What told them he was mine? Not by blood, but by choice. Cassie swallowed hard. You think that'll protect him, no, Mara said. But it tells the truth. Loud enough, maybe someone will listen. She looked down at Joey again. He don't care where he came from. Only that someone stayed. Far across the ridge, Bo Garrison watched torchlight flicker from the back of a barn. He lit a match off his boot and lit his cigar. Tomorrow he'd call for a hearing. Not legal, just public. Loud, angry, mean. And if the people wouldn't act, he'd force their hand. Because once a woman claims what don't belong, others might get the same idea. And Bo Garrison wasn't about to let Dry Hollow forget who it belonged to. The river ran high that morning, swollen from last night's rain, churning like it carried every secret these hills ever whispered. Fog clung to the low ground. Birds wouldn't sing. Even the wind held its breath. Mara Whitcomb knelt by the edge of the water, her skirts soaked to the hem, holding Joey close against her chest. The child slept soundly, his breath steady, his skin warmer now. She could feel his small heartbeat against her ribs. The beads around his wrist glinted faintly in the gray light. She hadn't meant to walk all the way down to the river, but her feet had taken her there like the land itself had memory, and needed her to remember too. Behind her, Elias approached quietly. You all right? He asked. She didn't turn. I used to come here with Samuel, before he got sick. Elias stepped closer. The river's current rushed past them like time made liquid. He'd throw pebbles and tell me which ones were lucky. Always said the flat ones skipped better because they were brave. Mara rocked Joey slowly. I buried his ashes on that hill over there. Didn't tell no one. Not even the preacher. Elias didn't interrupt. I thought maybe if I kept him close to water, he wouldn't feel so alone. Or maybe I wouldn't. Finally, she looked at Elias. Her face was pale but calm. That's the thing about mourning out here. It doesn't ask permission. It just lives in the dirt with you. Elias nodded. Sometimes the dirt knows more than we do. A branch cracked behind them, sharp and sudden. They both turned as Knowledge stepped out from the trees, flanked by two others, Hosa and Tyanita elders from the ridge. Mara rose, shifting Joey in her arms instinctively. Elias greeted them with a short nod. You made good time. Knowledge's face was worn by years, and Weather his eyes steady. He looked at the baby first, then Mara, and finally Elias. This is the child. Elias stepped forward. His mother was of your blood. She gave him to me before passing. No one else knows his name but us. Knowledge walked forward. Mara stiffened, but the man simply placed 2 fingers lightly on Joey's forehead. He carries the dream mark, he said softly. Hosa stepped forward next. We remember his mother. She came from Red Willow. Died too young, but strong. Gave birth in winter. Tyanita added. She called him Ayosti. Little one. He has a name, and that name holds weight. Mara blinked. Joey. His name is Ayosti. Knowledge looked to her. You may call him what you like, but the spirits will know the truth. Mara looked down at the child. Then I'll know it too. Elias exhaled slowly. They're planning a hearing in town. Garrison wants to strip Mara of her rights. Make it loud. Ugly. We will come, Knowledge said. We will speak. The child belongs to his people. That makes him part of yours too. Mara held Ayosti closer. I'm not afraid of them. But I am afraid for him. Knowledge looked out over the river. Then we stand between him and the fear. By late afternoon, the cabin swelled with quiet energy. Cassie baked bread without being asked. Elias cleaned his rifle in silence. The elders sat at the hearth drinking black tea brewed from roots they brought down the mountain. Mara changed into a faded blue dress, one she hadn't worn since Samuel's funeral. She braided her hair, tucked the eagle feather Elias gave her behind her ear, and held Ayosti with arms that no longer trembled. They'll try to shame you, Elias said quietly. Let them try, she replied. Cassie entered, wiping her hands. The town square's filling up already. Bo's got a crate out like it's church. Mara raised an eyebrow. Good. Let him preach. She took a final look around the cabin, then stepped out onto the porch, where the late sun lit the edge of the woods. She didn't say a word, but the elders rose. Elias stood beside her. As they walked down the path into Dry Hollow, Cassie whispered to herself, Today the water won't carry away what don't belong. It's gonna remember. In town, Bo Garrison stood on that wooden crate like it was a throne. The people had gathered, some out of curiosity, some out of fear, a few out of spite. He raised his hand. Folks, today we speak plain. There's a woman living at the edge of town raising a child that ain't hers. A child that don't belong to our kind. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Briggs stood in the back, arms folded, silent. Bo went on, It ain't about hate. It's about order, about law. That child's got no papers, no family in this town. She can't just claim him. Then the crowd parted. Mara walked forward, Ayosti in her arms, flanked by Elias and the elders. Bo's voice faltered. What's this? Mara climbed onto the crate. Quiet spread like wildfire. She held Ayosti up, not high, not like a show, but with reverence. This is Ayosti. His name means little one. His mother gave him to a man she trusted. That man brought him to me when he had no one else. I fed him. I kept him alive. And I will not let you erase him. Bo tried to interject. You don't have the right. Knowledge's voice cut through like a blade. She has the oldest right, the right to protect, the right to name. And we, his people, bear witness. Tyanita stepped forward, lifting the beaded bracelet. These belong to his mother. We can prove his lineage. We know who he is. Bo turned to the crowd. And what about the law? Briggs finally stepped forward. Sometimes, Bo, the law gets written by cowards, but truth that don't change. Silence. Mara looked around, gaze hard as stone. This town's drawn lines in dirt long enough. You want to say this child don't belong, say it. But say it knowing you're choosing fear over mercy. Ayosti stirred, blinked up at her, then reached out toward the setting sun. Cassie stepped beside her. He belongs. Because we say so. Because he's loved. Bo stepped down, face red with fury. This ain't over. No, Mara said. It's just beginning. That night, the town was quiet. The elders returned to the cabin, with them sitting near the fire like old trees at rest. Mara bathed Ayosti in a basin of warm water, kissed his forehead, and laid him down beside the fire. Elias sat nearby. You spoke like a woman who knew the river wouldn't carry her away. Mara smiled faintly. Because I finally know I ain't the one who's drifting anymore. Outside, the river kept running, but this time it didn't feel like it was pulling her under. It felt like it was carrying her forward. The firelight flickered across the cabin walls, casting long, shifting shadows that danced like ghosts with old grudges. The elders had gone back to the ridge, their duty done, but the weight of their presence still lingered in the room like smoke. Cassie was asleep in the loft. Ayosti dozed in the cradle. Elias carved just days ago, his chest rising steady and sure. But Mara couldn't sleep. She sat at the table, turning over a piece of paper in her hands. Bo Garrison's new petition. Someone had slid it under their door that morning, slick with threat, but dressed like law. Elias stood by the window, eyes fixed on the tree line. He ain't done. I know, Mara said, but I also know what fear looks like. That speech I gave didn't scare him. The crowd's silence did. Elias stepped away from the glass. Bo don't like losing ground. He's not just angry at me, Mara added. He's angry that we made them see something he worked so hard to keep buried. She set the petition down. I'm not going to let him rewrite the ending. Not for Ayosti. Not for any of us. Elias pulled a small bag of salt from his coat and placed it on the table. Mara looked at it confused. What's that for salt? The corners, the windows, the threshold. My grandmother used to say it keeps darkness from entering uninvited. Mara gave him a crooked smile. Superstition, maybe, but it's helped before. So they did. Together in silence. Elias sprinkled salt across the sills and Mara traced it along the doorframe with a finger. It felt ridiculous and necessary all at once, like armor sewn from memory. When they were done, they stood outside for a moment, the sky wide above them and cold with stars. Elias broke the silence. You ever think about leaving? All the time, Mara admitted. But then I think, why should I be the one to run? Elias looked at her steady. You've got fight in you, Mara Whitcomb. She looked out into the trees. It ain't just fight. It's roots. Behind them, Ayosti stirred and let out a small cry. Mara went in to soothe him, but Elias lingered a moment longer. He could feel it, something coming. Not fast. Not loud, but creeping. A kind of war that didn't start with bullets. It started with fear. Bo Garrison sat in his study, a single candle burning low. The petition lay open on the desk, his signature at the top in bold, angry ink. but fewer names followed than he expected. He gripped the edge of the desk. They were slipping from him. Not fast, but enough to matter. And if fear didn't hold them anymore, then salt lines and cradle songs just might win. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid trembling in his glass. If they won't fear shadows, he muttered, then I'll teach them to fear fire. The next morning, Cassie found the message scrawled on the well, a crude symbol painted in tar. A warning. Not just for Mara, but for anyone who stood with her. Mara scrubbed it off with lye and ash hands, raw by the time she finished. Briggs arrived just before noon carrying a wrapped loaf of bread and a face drawn with worry. They're planning something, he said. Something worse than hearings or speeches. Elias folded his arms. We know. Mara took the bread and set it down. Let them come. Briggs looked between them. There's only so much standing one woman can do. I'm not standing alone, she replied. Not anymore. That night, Elias moved his bedroll into the main room. Cassie kept a knife under her pillow. Mara placed a sprig of dried sage beside Iosti's cradle. It didn't feel like superstition. It felt like preparation. 3 nights later, the fire came. It started in the barn. Dry hay lit fast. Flames licked at the sky like they had teeth. By the time Elias ran out with a bucket, half the structure was already gone. Cassie screamed from the doorway. Mara rushed Iosti out into the clearing, shielding him from the smoke. Elias called to the shadows. Show your face, coward. But no one stepped out. By dawn, the barn was ash and scorched bone. The goats had escaped, but not the chickens. Smoke curled from the ruins as the sun broke through low clouds. Iosti coughed once, then quieted against Mara's shoulder. I knew they'd try, she said, her voice steady. But I thought they'd wait longer. Elias picked up a half-burned beam. They wanted to scare us, not destroy us, not yet. Briggs arrived an hour later. You need to leave. Not forever, just until this cools off. I'm not hiding, Mara said. It's not hiding, Briggs said. It's surviving. There's a safe house near Buck's Ridge, a place the Union used during the war. Remote, defensible. Elias nodded. I know it. Briggs looked at Iosti. He deserves more than ashes and shadows. Mara looked down at the child. He deserves a future. And then almost to herself. Let them burn what they want. They can't touch what I carry inside. They packed that night. Just the essentials. Cassie wrapped her mother's Bible in cloth. Elias cleaned and loaded his rifle. Mara folded the eagle feather and the beaded bracelet into Iosti's blanket. Before sunrise, they disappeared into the forest, Mara, Elias, Cassie, and the child. Bo Garrison woke to find the cabin empty and the smoke trail gone. He didn't smile. He didn't relax, because deep down he knew running wasn't the same as surrender. It was retreat. And some fights don't end when the smoke clears. They only get quieter. Waiting. The path to Buck's Ridge was narrow and winding, a forgotten vein carved through the trees by old feet and older hooves. It had once carried Union scouts and contraband arms. Now it bore a woman, a child, and 2 souls who refused to surrender. The safe house was nothing more than a stone and timber cabin, tucked into a gully, moss creeping up one side like nature was trying to reclaim it. But the roof held. The well ran clear. The chimney hadn't collapsed. They arrived just after dawn, breath fogging in the cool air, boots caked in mud. Mara stepped into the doorway. First Iosti against her chest, still asleep, despite the jostling ride. Elias followed, rifle ready, scanning the tree line. Cassie brought up the rear, silent hands shaking slightly from the cold, and fear she wouldn't admit out loud. Inside, dust swirled in slants of sunlight. Cobwebs stitched the corners, but the bones of the place were strong. Elias cleared the hearth and set about starting a fire. Cassie unpacked the dry goods Briggs had given them. Mara laid Iosti in a makeshift cradle lined with quilts. Nobody spoke for a while. Finally, Mara said, "This isn't running. It's fortifying." Elias gave her a quick glance. "Call it whatever keeps your spine straight." She looked down at the baby. "It's not just about spine. It's about future." The flames in the hearth caught and spread, crackling with life. Mara whispered the day's mantra under her breath. "Survival ain't silence. It's strategy." Back in Dry Hollow, Bo Garrison stood in the center of town with nothing left to burn. "They ran," Lucas said, arms crossed. Bo spit on the dirt. "They're regrouping." What now? Bo scanned the faces nearby. Some still loyal, some hesitant, and some watching too quietly. "We make an example." "Not of her," Bo said, "but of anyone who helps her. Preacher, Tolan, hell, even Briggs." Lucas frowned. Briggs' Bo leaned in close. "He's been too loud lately. Too soft. I want eyes on him." We squeeze until something breaks. Back at Buck's Ridge, they built routines. Elias set traps and checked the perimeter twice daily. Cassie boiled water, gathered herbs, and helped Mara reinforce the window frames with spare wood. The forest around them wasn't just cover, it was its own kind of warning system. Twigs snapped, birds alerted. Elias could read the quiet like a ledger. On the fourth day, a figure appeared through the trees. Ronan. He wore the mountain like a second skin leather vest, silver in his beard, and eyes that had seen too much and said too little. Cassie rushed out, arms wide. Uncle Elias tensed until he recognized the man. Ronan embraced her quickly, then stepped inside without invitation, the way only family could. "Briggs sent word," he said. "Told me you'd need help." Mara eyed him warily. "And what kind of help do you offer?" Ronan removed his hat and dropped it on the table. "The kind that shoots straighter than it talks, and the kind that remembers where the old trail lines are, the ones they don't teach in town." Elias smirked. "We could use that." They spent that night poring over maps Ronan drew from memory. Paths, blind spots, old logging roads. The land itself would fight for them if they used it right. "Bo's gonna come looking," Ronan said. "Not himself. He'll send someone else. They'll play friendly first, then hard." "We don't need to win a war," Mara said. "We just need to outlast it." Elias added, "Long enough for the town to stop following a man just 'cause he shouts loud." Cassie lit a lantern and hung it in the window. A small light. A signal. Just in case someone out there needed to know they weren't alone. That night, Iosti woke with a cry. Mara took him outside, walking with him under the stars. The forest was still. Even the wind felt cautious. She looked up and said quietly, "You were born in fire, little one, but you'll grow in the quiet between storms." Behind her, Elias stepped onto the porch. "You good?" She nodded. "I will be." He leaned against the railing. "You believe we can outwait this? Believe the land keeps memory better than people do, and this land remembers mercy too." Elias studied her in the moonlight. "That's a heavy thing to carry." "I ain't carrying it alone." Iosti stirred in her arms. Mara whispered to him, "We're not just surviving. We're showing them how." 2 days later, a gunshot rang out at the edge of the clearing. Elias was first out the door, rifle raised. Ronan followed, low and silent. They found a man bleeding under a pine tree, not a townsperson. A scout hired muscle judging by the boots. Elias checked for others. Ronan bound the man's wound roughly, but not fatally. When the scout came to Elias, asked, "Who sent you?" The man coughed blood. "Didn't say. Just paid. Told me to find the baby. Mark the place. More coming." Elias stood slowly. "Then we send them a message back. They let the man live, but barely." Ronan carved a mark into the nearby tree, the same symbol Bo had painted on the well, but this time scorched into the bark and reversed. "They'll understand what it means," Ronan said. "What's it mean?" Cassie asked. Ronan glanced at her. "Means the hunted know how to hunt too." That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She sat at the table with a fresh map and a list of names, people in Dry Hollow who had stayed silent. Not enemies. Not yet. But not allies either. "We can't fight all of them," she said. Elias sat across from her. "We won't have to." Ronan poured coffee into 3 tin mugs. "We don't turn every heart. Just enough to shift the wind." Cassie came down the stairs, holding Ayosti in her arms. The child looked around the room like he understood all of it. The firelight, the fear, the fight. Mara reached out and touched his cheek. "He'll remember this. Not as war, but as a kind of becoming." And from the edge of the woods, another lantern flickered faintly. Someone out there had seen Cassie's light and lit one of their own. The morning after the scout was sent back, marked and bleeding, the woods around Buck's Ridge took on a different silence. Not peaceful, not fearful, watchful. Like even the trees were waiting for what came next. Inside the cabin, Ronan sharpened a skinning knife, while Elias cleaned his rifle. Cassie kneaded dough with steady rhythm, and Mara nursed Ayosti while keeping one eye on the window. The fire in the hearth crackled low and constant. Survival had become routine, but no one mistook it for peace. Mara broke the silence. "They'll come again, and next time they won't just send one." Ronan didn't look up. "Then we don't just prepare to survive, we prepare to send them back different." Cassie set the dough aside to rise. "We can't just fight with bullets. People in Dry Hollow need to see more than fear. They need to see truth." Mara nodded. "Which means we stop hiding and start feeding." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Feeding blood's already been spilled," Mara said. "Now it's time for bread." Cassie looked up, eyes catching the firelight. "You want to change a town, start with what they break their fast on." By noon, Ronan and Elias had mapped out 4 safe paths into town. Cassie wrote out a list of people they trusted, those who had helped in small, quiet ways. Folks who might be ready to stand up if they saw they weren't alone. Mara packed small loaves of bread wrapped in cloth and tucked sprigs of dried sage into each one. "Not just food," she said. "A message." Elias nodded. "They'll understand." Mara and Cassie rode out that afternoon, cloaks pulled low baskets slung over the saddlebags. The forest gave way to open fields, and soon Dry Hollow appeared smaller than it had ever looked before. Not because it changed, but because they had. They didn't go to the square. They went door to door. The preacher's wife opened her door first, eyes wide with worry, that melted into something like hope. "For the little ones," Mara said, placing the bread in her hands. Next was old Tomlin, who once refused to share water with Cassie. This time he didn't speak, just took the bread and nodded, closing the door slowly, like he was afraid of how much he felt. By sundown, they'd visited 11 houses, 11 small fires rekindled. As they rode back toward Buck's Ridge, Cassie turned to Mara. "You think it's enough?" "It's a start," Mara said. And right now, that's everything. That night, a knock came at the cabin door. 3 soft raps, then silence. Elias opened it slowly. Outside stood 2 women and a boy no more than 12. The boy held a lantern. One woman clutched a sack of flour. The other held a rifle in trembling hands. "We heard you might need hands," the woman with the sack said. Ronan stepped forward. Plenty of work to go around. More came the next day. A carpenter, a field nurse, a mute old man with a wagon full of scrap iron. They didn't come loud. They came ready. Each one brought something: small food tools, old letters from kin soon who'd fought against hate before. The cabin couldn't hold them all, so they built lean-tos and tents beneath the trees. The safe house became something else entirely. A beginning, a resistance. Bo Garrison heard about it from Lucas, who brought back news like it was poison on his tongue. They're feeding people, organizing. Word is some are calling it the Ridge Circle. Bo stood in his office, fists clenched at his sides. "She thinks bread can beat blood." Lucas said nothing. Bo knocked over a chair. "You want to change a town, you burn its roots." He took a bottle from the shelf, smashed it against the wall, and stared at the dark stain it left. "They think they've lit a fire," he growled. "I'll show 'em a goddamn inferno." At the ridge, the nights grew colder, but the circle grew stronger. Cassie started a tradition. Every evening those gathered would break bread around the fire and share one story. Not always dramatic. Sometimes just a memory, a lesson, a name. "This is how we feed more than stomachs," she said. "This is how we remember what we're standing for." One night a man named Silas stood and spoke. My brother followed Bo. Thought he was protecting something. Turns out he was just afraid of losing what he never earned. I don't want to be that kind of man. Another night, Mara stood. My husband died quiet. Fever took him slow. But even near the end, he said to me, "Don't let the world make you small, Mara." I didn't understand what he meant until now. She looked around the circle, at Iosdi asleep on Cassie's lap, at the people once afraid to speak, now sitting with rifles across their knees. "I'm done being small." On the 12th day, Briggs arrived. Ronan met him at the trail, rifle drawn until he saw the man's face. "They're planning something big," Briggs said, breathless. "Bo's bringing in men from Black Hollow. Hired guns, not locals. They don't care about laws or children." Mara stepped out from the cabin. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 2 nights. 3 if we're lucky." Elias stepped beside her. "Then we use every hour." Mara looked toward the hills where lanterns now lit the darkness in rows. "We've bled. We've broken bread. And now?" She took a long breath. "We build." She turned to the people. No more running. No more waiting. Cassie passed her the small silver bell from the cabin door. Mara rang it once. The sound echoed down the ridge, through the woods, into every heart still listening. They weren't a camp. They were a force. And Dry Hollow would feel it. The ridge smelled of cedar smoke and steel. Tools clanked in rhythm. Hammer nail, shovel dirt. The people of the Ridge Circle worked like time had run short, because it had. Briggs's warning had lit a fire under every pair of hands. Makeshift barricades rose like crooked teeth along the tree line. Ditches were dug. Snares set. Mara oversaw it all with Iosdi strapped to her back, his tiny hands wrapped in her shawl. Cassie led a group boiling pitch to seal the cabin's seams. Elias trained those who could hold a rifle. Ronan carved lookout spots into the trunks of pine. They weren't preparing for a fair fight. They were preparing to survive the first blow. Night came fast. Stars blinked over the ridge like they too were waiting. Elias sat sharpening his blade when Mara walked over quiet as snowfall. "How many do you think they'll send?" she asked. "Enough to shake us. Not enough to end us." Mara looked out at the shadows beyond the tree line. "Then we make the ground remember them." From behind, Cassie whispered, "You don't stop the storm by hoping it changes course. You brace the door and you load the damn gun." The first strike came just before dawn. 2 riders crept in low through the southern woods, aiming to test the boundary. They found the first tripwire instead. The sharp crack of a branch snapping under pressure startled their horses. One reared, tossed its rider. The other bolted. Ronan was on them before they could stand. He didn't shoot, just walked them at gunpoint to the edge of the ridge and said, "Go tell your boss we're not prey. We're ground with teeth." The men ran. It wasn't the battle, it was the message, and messages spread faster than fire. Bo Garrison paced his barn like a caged wolf. "They let him live." Lucas nodded. "Sent him back rattled." Bo turned, grabbed a pitchfork, and slammed it against the wall. That wasn't a defense. That was theater. Lucas hesitated. It worked. Bo glared at him. "We don't stop now. We break their line. Tonight." The ridge circle didn't sleep. Fires burned low, casting orange halos on each face. Mara sat with Aoste against her chest, singing softly. Cassie passed out dried meat. Elias loaded fresh rounds into each rifle. Ronan laid traps where no one would think to look. When the first torch flickered on the horizon, no one flinched. The hired men came from 3 sides, silent, fast, brutal. But the land wasn't quiet. It screamed back. One fell into a pit trap lined with carved stakes. Another's torch sparked a pitch-doused net that dropped from the trees. Chaos broke out. Elias fired once, twice, missed the third. Ronan dropped one with a single shot through the thigh. Mara ducked behind a rock ledge with Cassie and the baby whispering prayers and curses into the dark. The cabin door held. Barely. A man slammed against it with a hatchet. Elias met him on the other side with the butt of his rifle. One crack. One groan. Silence. A fire started on the eastern edge but was quickly smothered by the wet blankets Cassie and 2 others tossed over it. For 15 minutes it was a blur of smoke, sweat, screams. Then came the whistle. 3 sharp blasts from Ronan. Retreat. The attackers faded into the woods. The ridge held. But barely. Bodies were counted. One of their own was wounded, a boy no older than 16. Mara sat with him, rapping his shoulder, whispering, "You didn't fall. You stood." The others circled, weary but alive. Elias stood in the center, blood on his hands, none of it his. "That was Bo's warning," Ronan said. Mara looked out into the dark. "Then here's ours, we're still standing." She took the bell and rang at once. Back in town, Bo cursed the failure. "He's got 'em thinking they're soldiers." Lucas said nothing. Bo grabbed his coat. "Then we stop treating them like rebels and start treating them like traitors." Lucas flinched. "You're going to kill them," Bo's voice was ice. "I'm going to put an end to this theater, and I'll make sure they beg before the curtain falls." The next morning, silence hung like fog. The wounded were tended, the traps reset, the fire relit. But the circle knew Bo wouldn't back off now. He'd come harder, angrier. And next time he'd bring fire not just to burn, but to destroy. Mara stood with Elias and Ronan, drawing new lines in the dirt with a stick. He wants to crush our spirit. Elias said, then we make our spirit louder than his fire. Cassie stepped up, bruised and bold. We've sent a message. Now we raise a voice. They all looked toward Dry Hollow, a town still asleep, still unsure, but waking. The next move wouldn't just be defense, it would be witness. And it would shake the valley. The valley held its breath. The aftermath of the first strike hung heavy in the ridge circle like smoke that wouldn't clear. Bruised arms, burned wood, wounded pride. But the spirit had never burned brighter. Briggs returned with word Bo was rallying more men, offering pay, promising pardons for past sins. And he had begun calling Mara by name in the square, loud and bitter. He wants your blood, Briggs said. Not your ideas, not your people. You. Mara stared into the fire. Ayosti gurgled beside her, chewing on a carved wooden ring Cassie had made. He can want it, Mara said. Doesn't mean he gets it. Across the camp, Cassie paced. We keep waiting for them to bring the fight. But maybe it's time we brought the truth. What do you mean? Elias asked. I mean, Cassie said, eyes firm, we walk into Dry Hollow. Not with torches, with stories, with faces, with truth. Ronan sat up straighter. You're talking about a witness. Exactly. Not a raid. A reckoning. Mara met her eyes. You sure it won't turn into a lynching? Cassie gave a sad, dry smile. Not if we bring the ones Bo can't silence. Mara stood pulled on her coat. Then we do it at dawn. She turned to the people gathered, her voice low and unwavering. You only silence what you fear. So let him hear us coming. They came down the ridge with the rising sun. Not in secret. Not in shadows. They came walking, old, young, wounded, strong. No rifles raised. Only eyes. Mara held Ayosti. Cassie walked at her side. Elias and Ronan flanked the rear. At least 30 others followed, each holding a lantern or bell or nothing at all but resolve. Dry Hollow had never seen anything like it. The townsfolk paused mid-step, mid-sentence as the ridge circle passed. Some gawked. Others whispered. One woman dropped her basket. They didn't stop until they reached the square. Bo was already there. He stood on the steps of the town hall like a man caught mid-speech. Lucas beside him, hand on his revolver. Mara stepped forward, steady. You speak loud, Bo, she called. But now you're gonna listen. The square held maybe 100 people now. Silent. Bo laughed. You really think parading through town like you're Jesus and his strays is gonna change a damn thing? No, Cassie said, stepping beside Mara. But truth ain't about changing you. It's about freeing everyone else. She turned to the crowd. How many of you helped us? Gave bread, gave word, gave warning. At first, no hands. Then an old man near the saloon lifted his. Then the preacher's wife. Then the baker. 8. Then 15. Then 24. Bo's face soured. Mara raised her voice. We came here to remind you this town ain't his. It's yours. Always was. And what you allow now decides what your children inherit later. A child stepped forward. The boy who had carried a lantern that night up at the ridge. He looked up at Bo. My mama says you used to be kind. Bo stepped down off the steps. Your mama should keep her mouth shut. The crowd stirred. Mara locked eyes with Bo. You want to end this, do it now. But you won't do it in shadows. You'll do it with all of Dry Hollow watching. Bo pulled his revolver. Elias moved hand already on his holster, but Ronan's voice cut through. Don't. Mara didn't flinch. Go ahead, Bo. Make yourself a martyr to fear. Or put that gun down and prove you got even a drop of man left in you. Bo hesitated. Lucas stepped forward. Bo. Shut up, Bo snapped. But something cracked in the square. Not a noise. A silence. The kind that happens when people stop following. Bo saw it. And he lowered the gun. Not all the way. But enough. Cassie stepped between them. We didn't come to hang you. We came to bury what you built. Quietly. Together. Or not. She looked around. This is your choice. A woman near the general store stepped forward. My son's out at the ridge. He fought last night. Bled for it. She turned to Bo. You didn't even know. Bo looked around. Faces he'd known for years, now unreadable. Lucas took a step back. I built this town, Bo growled. Mara shook her head. No. You choked it. We're here to let it breathe. Bo's hand trembled. Then he dropped the gun. It hit the ground with a dull thud. He turned, walked away. Nobody followed. The square held its silence a beat longer. Then the preacher stepped forward. Let them speak. And they did. One by one, the ridge circle stood, told their names, their stories, their truths. No flames, no fists, just voice. Dry Hollow listened. The bells they'd carried began to ring one by one. Not as warning, as witness. That night back on the ridge, no barricades were rebuilt, no guns reloaded, only firewood stacked, bread broken. The first full night's sleep in weeks settled over the valley. But sleep wasn't surrender. Mara sat beside the fire holding Iosti, watching the smoke curl into stars. We stood, she whispered. Now we heal. Behind her, Elias whispered back, not all wounds show blood. And from down in the town, lights flickered not in fear, but in understanding. The ground had shifted, and something old had ended. Something new waited in the dawn. Winter came soft that year. The snows didn't bury the ridge. They blanketed it light, clean, gentle, like the land was letting out a long-held breath. No fires burned in fear now, just for warmth, just for stories. Mara stood on the porch of the rebuilt cabin, Iosti tugging at the hem of her coat, now walking with an uneven wobble, and a laugh that seemed too loud for a child born in fire. She smiled, leaned down, and scooped him up. He still doesn't like shoes, Elias said from the steps, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He was born ready to run, Mara said. Not from anything this time. No, she said. Toward. The ridge circle hadn't vanished. It had rooted. Some families stayed. Some returned to Dry Hollow not in retreat, but in purpose. They took new roles, school teachers, carpenters, midwives, not as rebels, as reminders. Cassie had moved into a small house near the old train tracks, turning it into a place where women could come when they had nowhere else to go. A roof, a meal, a voice that said, "You still matter." Ronan had gone further north, sent letters back with pressed wildflowers and notes about other towns where people were waking up to themselves. Bo Garrison never left Dry Hollow, but he never spoke publicly again. Lucas ran the general store, now quieter, more watchful. Not every man changes, but sometimes silence becomes less cruel. The preacher started ringing the bell again only on Sundays now, not for warning, for weddings, for births. In early spring, they planted a garden where the first trap had been laid. Not just any garden, a big one. One with corn and beans and tomatoes and a plaque that read, "Fed with courage, grown in truth." Children played between the rows. No one told them not to be loud. One afternoon, Cassie stood beside Mara at the garden's edge, watching Ayosti try to catch a butterfly. "He's gonna know," Cassie said. "Know what you did, what we all did. Even if he can't remember it himself," Mara nodded. "We didn't fight to be remembered. We fought so he wouldn't have to." Cassie was quiet a moment, then smiled. "Still, someone ought to write it down." "I already started," Mara said, tapping her coat pocket. Cassie raised an eyebrow. "A journal. Maybe more. Think people will read it?" Mara looked across the ridge, the wind stirring the garden rose. "Maybe. Maybe not. But stories aren't about being read. They're about being lived. And this one's not over." And that night, a small fire burned near the cabin. Not for warmth, not for defense, just for gathering. The Ridge families brought what they had: dried apples, spiced bread, strips of venison. Laughter rose between sips of cider and the sound of old fiddle strings. One of the newer settlers, a teenage girl named Leah, asked Cassie if it was true they used to sleep with rifles under their pillows. Cassie chuckled. "Only when we weren't sleeping with guilt." Leah looked puzzled. "Means we had to learn a different kind of strength," Mara added. "Not just the kind that pulls a trigger, the kind that holds a hand out." Elias joined them, carrying Ayosti on his shoulders. "That's what built this place, and what'll keep it whole." They all looked out toward Dry Hollow. Its lights twinkled in the distance, steady. Changed. Cassie raised her mug. "To what we saved." Mara raised hers. "And to what we're still building." Around the fire, heads nodded. Cups clinked, and no one looked over their shoulder. The story had started with blood. It ended with bread. Somewhere down the line, a new school opened. One room, stone chimney, painted shutters. On the first day, a teacher read from a small, leather-bound book. It didn't start with "Once Upon a Time." It started with smoke. And a woman with a baby. And a town that chose to remember instead of forget. As the children listened, none of them knew the names Mara, Cassie, Elias, or Ronan by heart. But they would. Because the valley that had once closed its doors had opened its ears. Because someone had the courage to tell the truth when it cost everything. And because freedom once planted has a way of growing back wild, under any sky, in any soil, if enough people choose to water it. One voice, one lantern, one stand at a time. Years later, Ayosti would ask his mother what happened that winter, why so many people told stories in whispers, why the garden had a plaque, why he had no memory of a town where people once hid from each other. Mara would sit beside him on that same porch, weathered now, and hand him a worn book. Her handwriting still strong, the leather faded from use. "Read this," she'd say, "but more than that, feel it. Because it's not just our story. It's the kind that grows roots inside you. And one day, someone else will need to hear it too." And when Ayosti read the final page with the smoke curling in the sky, and the lantern lit on the ridge, he'd understand. Survival was never the point. It was the promise. That a valley, no matter how broken, could learn to hold light again. And remember,